Okay, so I don't know where you want to start. I mean, it seems like we could choose to either talk about the Lord's Supper, or we could talk about women in the life of the church, or if we wanted to, we could talk about problems with diversity.
Women in the life of the church.
You want to talk about women in the life of the church?
I think that's the reason I was the only man that was brave enough to say like, ooh, you know, we saw this what Paul said, they're like, we don't want to answer to that.
Or
Yeah.
diversity, I mean, it's pretty much.
Well, let's start with women in the church, right? And he spent some time in the workbook trying to say Paul's not as tough as he seems to be, right? He tries to make that argument. And the thing he says that I recall is that the argument that the man is the head of the woman is not one of lordship, but he tries to say separate roles yielding right of way, which sounds a lot to me like separate but equal to me.
It would seem like an unconvincing argument.
It feels very unconvincing. Yeah.
Yeah, they just didn't put their money where their mouth was.
Well, and it's interesting because throughout so far we've looked in the book that some of the Corinthians take their freedom in Christ to its logical conclusions, and Paul tries to reel them in. Like freedom is not for its own sake. And here he sort of does this again. Now, I hope it's helpful, right? He reviewed the bit about the hair, the head coverings, right?
Yeah.
That apparently, and I've heard this argument, that the way women wore their hair in Corinth indicated that whether or not they were essentially temple prostitutes. So a woman with her head uncovered in worship was looking so much like what they were doing across the street at the temple brothel that Paul was concerned it would be confusing for people. So I think if you don't mind me saying, I don't want to, my opinion doesn't matter. I want to say as a parent, I tell my daughter, you should be able to wear whatever you want. And I also say there are, unfortunately, some people in the world who are sick, who will think that what you're wearing gives them permission that it doesn't give them. So while you have your freedom, be wise and shrewd. That's the best I can do as a dad. I mean, as a mom, I think you'd say the same thing, right? Like, so essentially, like you get to be you, and you've got to circumnavigate stupid people. I don't hear Paul saying, ladies, your hair is yours and whatever, and I'm worried about reputation. I don't hear both of those here. I don't think it's, I could imagine him saying both of those things. It's just that the letter doesn't. So I don't know if you want to talk about hair first, but I thought hair would be the easier entry.
Well, like I said, what, women with shaved heads were slaves?
Yes, and or prostitutes.
And
remember that even the Virgin Mary in all the iconography, you never see her hair. You never see her hair. In all the icons, she's wearing a head covering.
She's always covered here.
So we've institutionalized that. And that this is true. If you're an Orthodox Jewish woman, the only people who see your hair are your family, and they only see it on Shabbat. You may be thinking, I see Orthodox Jewish women's hair all the time. That's a wig. They're wearing a wig so that you can't see their real hair.
I used to work with some Orthodox Jews.
I'm not talking about conservative Jews.
Oh,
This is only if you're Orthodox.
I thought they were.
Some conservative Jewish ladies will wear it, but that's extreme minority. Only truly Orthodox Jewish women wear the shadel, which in Arabic is called the hijab. But in general, Jewish women don't wear a hijab, they wear a wig. And you'd never know it because that wig costs $1,000. I mean, it's made of real human hair. It looks like it's their hair. It just isn't their hair.
I'm gonna call my friend Lydia.
It's a good question to ask. I know this because my brother is Orthodox. He was conservative at first, and he's Orthodox. And I'm not sure whether his wife, I've seen her hair or not. I don't know. I've been to her home on Shabbat, and maybe it was down. I mean, literally, when the woman blesses the candles, that's the first time she lets her hair down. That's where the expression comes from, to let your hair down. It's Shabbat, so you can let your hair down.
Okay, sorry, what's Shabbat?
Oh, it's Sabbath,
Oh, okay,
begins
so-
on Friday night and continues
okay,
until
yes.
Saturday evening.
So typical Jewish people around here, are they conservative or?
Yeah, there's two synagogues here. One is the conservative synagogue. I doubt anybody wears a shadel. I doubt it. Reform, hell no. There's a synagogue that has like 7 people in League City that's it's like a house synagogue, and it's funny, it's not Orthodox, it's Hasidic, which is a blend of Orthodox and mysticism. And I don't know, I will tell you, it's likely the ladies wear a shadel because the boys wear the talit, like the little tassels. You can see that coming out under their shirt, like as young kids, and they have the peyote, the curls. Yeah. So I haven't seen their moms, but it's likely they wear the shadel.
What were the curls called?
Peyote, like instead of peyote,
Oh, okay.
peyote.
We're gonna have to-
Yeah, peyote, it's a Hebrew word. Yeah,
Okay, I understand.
so it's a funny thing, and I think we need to be really clear, like, this is scripture, it's in the book, but like, there's this particular verse, does not nature itself put a man to shame to have long hair? Does not nature itself put a man to shame to have long hair? We all know, at our point, we say, no, only that's like culture and society, right? Because there's plenty of cultures and societies where men are expected to have long hair,
But didn't Solomon have long hair?
maybe.
Allegedly.
I mean, maybe. And what does he even mean by long hair? Does he mean to the small of your back, or does he just mean to your shoulders? I mean, Jesus in all the pictures has got what we'd call long hair, but maybe that was considered short hair then. Maybe long hair means you grow it to your butt crack. I mean, we don't know, but I think nobody in the room would say that that's a natural shame. Because according to nature, you don't ever cut your hair.
The Nazarites, or who were the people that had really long hair and didn't drink alcohol?
Nazarites during, and there's only 3 that are lifelong Nazarites that we know of. Usually you take a Nazarite vow, and when the vow's over, you shave your head and you drink alcohol.
Okay,
But John the Baptist is a lifelonger, and so is Samuel, and Samson's supposed to be, but he
yeah,
breaks
so
all
they
of
would
it.
have had very long hair. Not shaved.
To their butt crack.
You would have known it.
Yeah, you would have said, and they would have been, even with in their own community, those 3 guys, people thought they were nuts. I mean,
Yeah.
just to be really clear.
Well, the Caucasian Jesus had long hair. The
White
black-
Jesus but black Jesus has an afro, doesn't he?
But it ain't
But it's
long.
But it's longer.
It's
It's
woolly.
longer,
Yeah.
it's not like clipped up, right? It's not faded.
It's not as.
I saw one on Facebook that had him with a fade.
Was it a tight fade?
Yeah.
Because there were no tight fades back in the day, let's be real clear. You need clippers for that.
No, not like mine.
I mean, we're laughing, and I'm glad we're starting with something easy, right? We have a different understanding of what's natural with a capital N. By the way, if you've read the book of Romans,
This is
the book
natural.
of Romans has an argument against same-sex intercourse because it's against nature. That's what Paul writes. For a man to have relations with a man is against physics, which we understand that's crazy. Like, that's a crazy argument. That just makes no sense. Neither does it make sense that long hair is a natural shame for a man to have. So I think we need to enter the chapter at that point, if you don't mind. This is definitely an embedded culture. No, it's true that if you're in the Navy, you're not going to accept long hair. But if you're in the Navy, you probably don't want your kids having long hair either. My mom didn't want us having long hair because that's what hippies and drug dealers had. Same with tattoos. But we're figuring that out. I don't use drugs. So there we are.
Well, we grew up in the islands, and I'm sure you probably heard it here too. That they always told the girls, your hair is your crown and glory, don't cut your hair, let it grow and whatnot. First chance I got, I cut mine. 'Cause
Well, and the crown and glory shows up here too, doesn't it? It shows it up in here, which is why you're supposed to cover it, which I would argue, like, no, if it's a crown and glory, you should floss it. Like, you should not cut that.
So is that why, Well, I things have changed now. Some women still wear hats in church. Is it to cover their
Yeah,
head?
too. Well, yeah, I guess so. And in general, that comes from a Roman Catholic
I was
gonna
say.
background, because they've held on to that tradition.
Yeah.
We had one here, Naomi, who recently died.
Yeah,
She
the
was
hat lady.
90. She was the hat lady. Yeah, yeah. And her hair, what do you know, was short, and she still wore the hat because she was a fashionista.
My grandmother wore a hat every time she went in church. And when I came back from college and I wasn't wearing hats anymore, man, she was ready to just give me a whipping. And I was like, okay, times are changing.
We
When-
wore mantillas or prayer caps in church. And I loved them because when you were having a bad hair day.
We had to wear beanies.
Yeah.
When we went to
But
a
you
circle
know-
mass on something at high school.
And I appreciate that, but I also hear some Muslim women say that's why they love wearing the burqa, because you never have to worry about how you're dressed. And that's fine if you want to do it. It's not fine if you have to do it. Right? I mean, I think we get that, right? So I think it's fair to say, nothing against Paul here, but we've got a radically different cultural context for hair.
Mhm.
And therefore, if we can say the hair thing is silly, I think we can say the gender thing's silly too.
Oh, Mike, he says it's because of the angels, you know, it's like, because it just never says anything else.
Which is really confusing.
Yeah. really.
Because
You're like, well, duh, because of the angels, moving on, you know?
Okay, I'm
And
lost.
he doesn't spend much time on the angel thing. It's just like, wait a minute, where did that come
Yeah.
from? I'm really tired. Did I really read that?
And I don't actually understand that at all, because I don't even know Paul's own angelology. It certainly isn't ours.
Angelology?
Oh,
It is, yeah.
I thought you just made it up.
No, angelology is like a thing. You won't, I mean, Google will, Microsoft Word will redline that, but that's a word we use. And angelology is weird because at the time of the Hebrew Bible, angels looked like monsters. They didn't, I'm not sure if they had hair, that was the last thing you were seeing, because they were covered with eyeballs and on fire all the time, right? So I don't know that you were paying attention to their hair.
I joined this church a long time ago. I've learned all kinds of things.
Oh, well, I mean, we look at the Sistine Chapel, but if you want to know what an angel looks like, read the first chapter of Ezekiel. They have 4 faces and they have 3 pairs of wings and they're covered with eyeballs. Those are cherubs.
I know what an angel.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
It did not look like Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, it depends how you feel about Nicolas Cage. Some people think he's monstrous looking. Okay, anyway. All that to say, we get to men and women in the church, and there's this weird bit because in the study asked us to do some of this reading,
Mhm.
asked us to in the supplementary Bible references. I don't know if you noticed when Paul talks about these missionary couple called Priscilla and Aquila,
Mhm.
she always comes first, which means she's more important. This is an ancient world convention. You put the most important comes first. So when you hear about the brothers Zebedee, John and James, which one's more important?
James.
It's James. He always comes first. He just happens to die really quickly, like pretty quick after Jesus. So there's no more James, and now it's just John.
Is that why we have Mr. and Mrs.?
Oh, wait.
The man
Zebedee?
comes first.
Yeah, you lost me on.
Sons of
Zebedee.
Thunder, the two Jesus calls out the fishing boat.
Oh.
But in early lore, John's the one Jesus loves. But if that were clearly the case, he'd have come first. So we don't know who Jesus loves. Presumably you and me.
Love us all.
You and me. Yeah.
All about it.
Yeah. So all of this is kind of buried in culture. And again, Paul is doing both things a little bit here, because Priscilla comes first. There's a lady called Junia. That's definitely a female name, who is called by Paul an apostle, not a deacon or a church lady, like an apostle.
That's a whole line of women.
There's a whole line of ladies. So it seems like most scholars would say, if you don't mind, that this passage is unique to Corinth, not Paul's systematic theology about women. So there's something about Corinth and women in public and their hair that seems to not be a problem in Philippi and Rome for Paul. So once again, he's wading into gray area, if you don't mind me saying. I'm not going to defend him. I'm not gonna defend him. Cause I think he should say, that's right, Corinthians, you go, girls. I do, I think he should have said that, but he didn't.
Was there an especially promiscuous goddess cult at Corinth that you know about?
Not unique to, I mean, Corinth was the capital of Greece.
Yeah.
It's a port city, so lots of sailors. And, I mean, there seems to have been, I don't know about a sex cult, but like ISIS, the cult of ISIS did well there, but that's mystery religion.
And that's pretty much everywhere, right?
I think that's
Like
everywhere.
some huge temple to like. you know,
Yeah.
like, one of the ones the letters do is like, that's where the temple of so such and such.
Now that's Ephesus had a wonder of the ancient world, the
Yeah.
temple of Artemis there.
Yeah,
But Artemis not necessarily the sex cult, goddess of wisdom.
so I
So
just didn't know if like maybe, I figured like there was like a headquarter mother.
it'd be
house or
nice.
Yeah.
It'd be nice, but I think because it's a port city and frankly, it's the biggest city in Greece. It's like New York City.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like Las Vegas. Maybe that would be better.
Atlantic City.
New Orleans.
Ugh, Atlantic City. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
New Orleans.
New Orleans,
Yeah,
yeah. Amsterdam,
food.
yeah, why not?
Amsterdam.
I didn't mean to squash the women argument. I didn't mean to.
It's just confusing. I mean, he says that this paragraph that lists all the women's God's gift for leadership are
Mhm.
not restricted to men. A point that Paul will soon advance in this letter when he takes up this matter with the Corinthian men for misinterpreting the maxim, and then he quotes 14:33 to 36. But if you look at 14, it's like women should not be talking. They need to be silent. This is just confusing.
We should be
Yeah.
seen and not
Well,
heard.
and there is it is helpful, like there's guidance in Timothy about women and the scripture reads, I, Paul, do not permit a woman to speak in the assembly. Which is like, okay, you don't, that's your idea and it's not a good one. Right, like, so I've had people decode it as such. And I think what's important to remember, no matter how you come down on Paul's a good guy or a bad guy, this is not systematic theology, it's contextual. This is a problem in Corinth. It does not seem to be a problem for him in other cities. So we can't say definitively why this is such a problem in Corinth. We can speculate. And I don't like what he does. I don't. But I do understand because and we're in a denomination that affirms women's roles in leadership since 1976. Although there is a film I recently watched about the ordination of women in 1974. A couple of bishops did it without permission of General Convention, and it was real ugly. Like what the other bishops were saying to them and in public was like, we didn't gain 6 new priests, we lost 2 bishops. It was like, oh God, people really were saying that in our church? Yeah, they were. So this is newer for us. And so many people got bothered that they left and made a new denomination called the Anglican Church of North America, which is not even a real church, but it is. It has buildings and followers. So this is a thing. And the dissenters left. They left the Episcopal Church.
They always do.
They don't always.
Wait, now I don't remember, but the people that didn't like it, or the people that actually did.
The people that really didn't like it, or they kept quiet because they weren't ready to get their pension yet if they were clergy, right? And if you leave after 20 years, you leave your pension behind, and that seems hard.
Yeah, I heard someone speculate once that, or I don't know where they got this from, but they were saying that there was like some particular issue where the men were basically just, slagging off on their responsibilities and the women were having to do all this stuff. And so he was like, shh, be quiet, and force the men to speak up and like do their duty and the things that they're supposed to do.
And that's interesting speculation, and we don't know definitively. And again, it is so contextual that could be true because it's not in every one of his letters, right? It's not. It's in this one. And it's in a letter he didn't even write that has his name on it, which is to Timothy. So it's hard to come out where the guy is misogynist. And I think he's trying to do this thing that we all do, and it's really dangerous, whether you're a parent or a pastor or whatever, where you're like, I mean, I don't have like the best reason for why you shouldn't do this thing, but I don't want you to do this thing. So I don't want to say because I said so, but I'm going to come close to that.
Yeah.
I strongly encourage you not to.
I know this is really disappointing. I really wish I could make the guy look good, but what I want to say, the guy is actually real normal. It's not that he's equivocating. I think he's just up against a situation we don't completely know, and therefore what he writes is not systematic. And I feel really comfortable saying he's wrong about the hair and he's wrong about the ladies. And he's not wrong that order in worship is like important. There's times where worship becomes disorderly, and that becomes important too. Like when the schizophrenic man got up and started interrupting me in a sermon with I don't know what. It was important that he said what he needed to say, and then he left on his own terms. That seemed really important that day. If he did it every week, I would have lost my mind. But that day it was fine. To me, it's okay that people make noise during church, especially little ones. There are some people who hate that. I mean, I had somebody leave the church over that. I didn't know what to tell them other than that's how it's going to be. Well, I mean, I didn't mean it rude, like I get it, but maybe that could be a pleasant interruption instead of a negative one. It is for me. Like when it interrupts me, I usually laugh because it's cute and sweet.
Or it's so appropriate for whatever you're
Or it
saying.
seems really
It's just amazing.
appropriate, or it's better than what I'm saying anyway, right? So pay attention to that, right? Like, but we still like order is important. And I think that's the general umbrella he's trying to offer.
I didn't know the ACNA thing came from women. I thought it was from homosexuality. I didn't realize it went back further than that.
And it went back further. Homosexuality was like the last straw, but many people were already deeply disenfranchised. And if you ask them really why ACNA, it had to do with women. If they're honest, that was the start.
Yeah.
And then with LGBTQ rights, that pushed enough people over the edge with them.
Because like when I go up to visit my mom around Fort Worth, like here's Arley at Episcopal. I don't know if they're already on that side of, the Dallas Fort Worth line.
Yeah, the whole diocese left the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
Except for like 10 churches, which are all really small, and they got all the buildings, which was really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're still trying to figure it out today. I mean, we really are. And look, I'll tell you that there's parishes in the Episcopal Church that believe in women in ministry, but they'll never call one to be their rector. They wouldn't tell you that, but I will tell you that.
Say that again?
They're in favor of women in ministry, but they won't call a female rector.
I just met in my house.
Or she can be the associate, because then she can defer to the man who's the head.
Yeah, I feel like this section is, a lot of it kind of comes back to the, like, umbrella, little umbrella, bigger umbrella.
You learned about the umbrellas? Do you know who started the umbrellas? Bill Gothard. Do you know about this guy? Did you go to a Bill Gothard seminar?
I know, but I know who Bill Gothard is.
You can watch him. Do you know about the Duggars? Does anybody know about the Duggars? The family with like the 17 kids. They had their own show that was like, it wasn't Cheaper by the Dozen. I forget what it was called. It was like, but the Duggar family is part of the quiverful Christian movement, which believes you should have a quiver full of kids. So have as many as you possibly can. In their case, it was 17.
Kids.
What's that?
Did you say a quiver full of kids?
Yeah, I'm glad you don't know these terms. Amber and I probably know them,
I know what a
sadly.
quiver is because.
A quiver full of kids.
Bow and arrow.
Have as many arrows as you can, those being children. This is so weird. And anyway, there's this guy called Bill Gothard who was very influential, particularly in the late 80s and early 90s, who set up these training centers. And like he didn't personally come to our church, he made these videos, and they were these huge, like, they looked like the Bible. They were like silver and gold gilded pages to these massive volumes that were telling you how to be a Christian, called Precept Upon Precept. And one of the earliest things they talk about are the umbrellas of authority. So Christ is like the big umbrella and the husband needs to stand under that umbrella and all the women stand under the men's umbrella and never get out from his umbrella because you'll get wet. I mean,
The
that-
children are under the women, and then between the men and God is actually your priest as well. There's like an extra layer.
Your pastor, because priests are evil, right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's your pastor.
They sound Catholic, so they're wrong. So
But they used to say that whenever bad things happen to you.
it's because you ran from under your umbrella.
Because you stepped out, yeah, each umbrella is a layer of authority, and when you step out from underneath the umbrella, you know, you have your rainy day, because you know, you weren't covered by God's grace and his authority, because you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing.
What year was this?
Oh, no, that's still, I would tell you, Bill
a very
Gothard
common-
did that in the late eighties and nineties, but I kid you not, that there are massive denominations. I don't want to sound critical. I'm still ordained Southern Baptist. The Southern Baptist denomination believes that shit today about umbrellas. They do. And they recently just came out, like last year, where any church that has a woman in any ministerial capacity is kicked out of the convention. That's what they came up with last year. The president's my evil twin. His name's also Michael Stone. Yeah, evil twin. So I wanted, what I do want to say, without judging my Baptist neighbors, they're wrong, is that they're wrong. In every way, they're wrong about this one, but they're doing it biblically because they've taken this so literally, they forgot to take it seriously. And part of taking it seriously is looking at the context, which they did not do.
That's why you keep saying it's contextual.
It seems really important. Yeah, seems
Also,
really
I see
important.
people seem to be very selective of what they take.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Of
So
course.
that's why it's like they only focus on the things that benefit them, you know, and it's like, that's why I don't like that, oh, we just take it literally argument. Because you can always find 99 things they don't take literally.
Right.
They don't.
Oh, well, that part's figurative. Oh, that part
Yeah,
was covered by
exactly.
grace. Well, the Hebrew Bible's not binding on us anymore, but all of your arguments about like men being in charge and anti-homosexual relationships come from the Hebrew
Yeah.
Bible. So, well, because those are abominations,
Those
If
are
they ever bought
exceptions.
clothing from a department store.
right? Or
Then they're
eating
not-
shellfish, right? Oh, but those don't apply because Jesus mooted those things. I mean, this is again like the unfortunate part.
I even like how in this, I remember when I read it at home, it said something about, you know, during the two creation narrative. And I brought that up to one of my friends that's super conservative. And he came back with like, my pastor gave me this. It was like the most, you know, trying to tie these things that like pretend it isn't two creation
Yeah.
narratives you've ever seen.
Well, I will tell you, Paul actually does something very unrabbinic. I mean, rabbis all disagree, but it turns out that the rabbinic view is that the more you practice something, the better you get at it. I mean, we usually hold that view too, right?
Practice makes
That
perfect.
practice makes perfect. So there's a rabbinical view that if the man was created first, he's inferior to the woman anyway, because practice made perfect. No, I kid you not. And actually, if you know anything about the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the center, the pinnacle of creation is the creation of the woman. And Michelangelo apparently either shared that view or put it there to like stick it to the Pope. I mean, probably both. But the creation of woman's in the middle, not the creation of the man. That's like the first panel. So this is interesting to think through Paul's own use of Genesis here, that because the man was made first. Again, the classic rabbinic argument is that the first human being was not a man, but a humanoid that was essentially both genders at once, a hermaphrodite. And that since no animal could be found, I mean, and it's also kind of comical, like God made the saber-toothed tiger to be a companion. It was like, oh, never mind, that won't work. Like, really? Like, you needed to test that theory? Like, that should have been pretty clear. But since none of the animals were suitable help, God split the human being in half. Split the genitals in half, and they come back together and to become one. That's the one flesh argument, is you become one in community. Which I think is a lovely rabbinic argument. Of course, lots of rabbis disagree, and Paul appears to be one of them, but he's not standing in the Jewish interpretive majority here. So I don't want to say he's wrong. I want to say he's contextual, and context has changed, and thank God we disagree. I hope that's okay. Women can have short hair. It doesn't take away from your glory.
Thank
That's
you.
just total nonsense. Men can have long hair. That doesn't put them to shame unless it's really frizzy. But then they could just use product,
Mhm.
right? I mean, like,
Cream of clay.
What's a shame? I think that just means to be like a woman.
probably. And men shouldn't look like women. Yeah. Which again, we're like, sadly, we're still trying to figure that out in schools today, aren't we?
It's so boring. And, like, really? Yeah, that's so boring.
That's our big problem. Yeah. Well, maybe should we talk about the Lord's Supper or maybe I've talked too much about women, but there's things you're still interested in.
Wasn't there a question about diversity?
Yeah, the last question's about diversity.
Diversity.
Yeah.
Right? To what extent is diversity a cause of division in the church? And to what extent can such diverse people be united in the church? You want to take that one on?
I don't know. It just seemed like a good topic. Well, I mean, not just in church, we've got problems with race and gender and all the others, everyday life.
We've got problems with diversity in church. Is that okay that we just agree on that?
That
Now
we
we're,
just agree? or-
yeah, that we
or
agree on that.
disagree?
We got
Oh,
problems.
we do. agree
And
on
and
it.
I'm not even gonna talk about other churches, like I'm gonna say church period, and even in expressions here, we've got some trouble with this. Because we like to be open and inclusive, we say that, and I think we do the best we can. And like language is really saturated. So the prayer book uses only masculine pronouns for God. Some people don't mind, that's fine, but some people do. And words matter, so that's a problem. I'm not telling you God's female, I'm just telling you God isn't male. I mean, me, that's what I'm saying. But we struggle with a little thing like that, right? We struggle with language that is patriarchal beyond that. We struggle with racialized language. Consider in the church that white is pure and good and holy, and black is sin, evil, bad. And people have a hard time not mapping that on the skin tones, whether they admit it or not. Because if black's bad and you're black, then what are you? So we didn't, our language is like not straight. Our language is like, and to change people's language is really hard because you have to extend beyond your own context. Like we use this talk out in the world, like we do. We use military language a lot in church, including, I don't even just mean Onward Christian Soldiers, which is a hymn that will never be sung here while I'm here, right? Because that's gross. Right, marching is to war, really? Like, how about marching to peace protest? Like, I could do that, but marching is to war sounds really hard. It's steeped in military language and violence. A lot of people just say, well, the Bible's full of it, so God is too. And that's where it starts to get a bit divisive, right? So language is a thing. We're steeped in ableism, right? And it even to our own peril. Like I think I told you, I took communion to a lady in the hospital. She said, I can't take communion because I can't kneel.
Yeah, you told us that.
And I converted her in the room, which was great. but like that's a little bit of a thing.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Sometimes I think the language shifts are really subtle, like, even this kind of question at the end, because, a lot of, some of the reading and just in terms of like what is in this section kind of indicates again that, women are responsible for, men's behavior. Like even if you act up, you're still, it's not just you doing something bad, you're also making the man look bad because you're supposed to be under his authority. And so you're just, it's like a double whammy of your sin and then also his, because you're just like shining a light on everything that's wrong. But like, to what extent is diversity a cause of division in the church? Well, it isn't. Bigotry is. So it's just an unfair question. It's just to what extent is bigotry a cause of division in the church? And to what extent can diverse people be united?
Can bigoted people be united?
It's a ridiculous question. It isn't a problem. What are you talking about? It's bigotry.
That's an interesting frame. Yeah, I appreciate that thought. To what extent can such bigoted people be united?
Yeah, it's like, well, geez, I mean, so sometimes I think we're just, you know, in an attempt to focus on something good, like, we don't even realize the structure we're putting around certain questions with absolutely the best intentions. Because we just are so steeped in, you know, ideas and language.
And I would say that happens even in the open and inclusive group too, because I'll just give you an example. I've had like no fewer than 10 people complain to me about a car in our parking lot on Sunday that has political bumper stickers that they find offensive.
100%. Yeah, I was gonna.
I
say-
saw that car.
I know, I was
the other day.
thinking of that exact thing, because I was thinking, we're really good and want to be diverse in certain areas, but it's a lot more uncomfortable when it's like. Someone who believes differently than me, someone who votes differently than me, you know,
How do you include someone who does not want to include you?
yeah.
This is, I mean, I think that's really what I wished he'd asked. And I don't know the answer. My response to people is, well, I'm glad that person feels comfortable here because we're their best hope.
Say again what the sticker said.
Oh, I don't
Oh,
know.
it's a bunch of,
It's a lot.
it's a lot.
I couldn't believe
And
it
they
in the
park
Episcopal
when you
church. I like
first-
took a picture
when
and
you-
sent it to my friend. I'm like,
when
"See,
you
you
come in
thought
the
we were all a bunch of
driveway,
hippies."
It's the first car you see. And it's the way it's parked, you can't miss it.
Yeah,
Okay? It is the first vehicle you see. Because when I first saw it, I wish I was in my husband's truck.
And that person participates in parish life to some extent, participates in ministry, and has a right to their opinions, just like I do. And if the sermon is ever reifying of exclusivism or judgment, run me out of here. So glad you feel comfortable worshiping here. I'm gonna preach my conscience, not my partisanship, but I will preach my politics. Not partisan, political, and we're still here. So I find that very hopeful. I find it very hopeful, actually.
They're entitled, you know, to do, I mean, they have the right to do it, you know, just because we don't like it doesn't mean it's wrong, you know.
Do they live up the street from Bucky's?
I don't know, I bet they do.
Is it the 8 o'clock service or the 10:30?
8 o'clock.
10:30.
I saw,
Well,
no, I saw it at 8
The car's
o'clock.
here at both services. So, you
Oh.
know, I mean, and it
Oh.
does it matter who it is? It doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't.
The good news is open and inclusive means we do include people, and we include people who may not share inclusivity. And then that's when diversity isn't a problem. Now, when it becomes a problem is when we go to other folks in the congregation and say, like, take those stickers off or don't come here.
No,
Or
you
when
can't
we
do that.
say, your child is making noise in the service and it distracts me. That's when it becomes a problem. I think.
We left the church for that. We didn't leave the church. Phil's mother is Catholic, and she lived with us for a while. And Phil would we would take it over to St. Bernadette's, and Jessica was a little kid. And we took her one Saturday afternoon to church, and she started to fuss because she wasn't crying. She was just fussing. And someone came and told me I needed to take my child to the cry room. Well, you all know what happened, right?
You should have said the crying room is for you. The crying room's for you.
I
It was a
looked at
70s
them.
creation.
I looked at them and I was like, I know you ain't talking to me. And I refused, we did not leave. We
But see,
did not leave. We
that's-
never went back.
Yeah,
But we
but that's
didn't leave.
actually a great example that is not even partisan. That's like a cultural norm, right? In some places, that crying babies go to the lobby. And I would tell you that most parents, if their kid is out of control, would rather have them in the lobby. There's a difference between a crying baby and an alive child.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people say, so-and-so falls asleep, don't you want to talk to him? And my answer is no. Falling asleep's hard. If they can come take a nap, that's a gift, right? If I can put them to sleep, I am giving them a gift.
My husband rocks. He sits there and he rocks during the sermon and his eyes are closed. And every time I touch him, he gets pissed because he says, I can hear what he's saying.
Phil
know,
nods, he
He,
nods.
but he, I mean, he rocks and he nods and he can tell me almost word for word what
Yeah.
this man says. And I go, well, what did he say? He goes, "Da-da-da-da-da-da."
Doesn't bother me at all. No, again, if you view putting someone to sleep as a gift you gave them, what else is gonna bother you? But I mean, I think that is a way we can handle diversity in the church, as we say, that's not where I come from, good for you. To give you an example, this is like 7 years old. I had a lady certifiably off the rocker. I mean, she called me as a school parent, and she went off on me about how I was a bad priest because I had tattoos. And I'm kid you not, like this was like long and gross. Like it was really below the belt. And I was actually, it didn't hurt me at all. I knew she just had lost her mind temporarily. And anyway, I think I'd ended up sharing this in a sermon a couple months later, and this lady came up to me who was super sweet. I mean, she really was a lovely lady, and she was an older lady, and she said to me, you know, I don't even care about your tattoos at all. And then the man behind her said, I don't know what they mean, and I do care about them because you do. And that touched my heart. Both responses did. And I think that's diversity in church. So they're not for me, and I care about them because they mean something to you.
Well, I'll say this church has come a long way. I know I've told you guys the story before when I first came here
Oh, yeah.
years ago. No one spoke to me. I just got married and moved here. This was the closest church
Mhm.
to my apartment. I came here and sat, had communion, everything, went through the whole service. Church was out. I left. No one spoke. No one said hello. No one said, shook my hand, drop dead, go to hell, nothing. Just like I was totally invisible. I didn't come back to this church until I wanted to get ashes, because the church I was going to was doing this drive-through thing, which has become popular now, but I wanted the Eucharist on Ash Wednesday. This man here was the priest, or is still the priest. And I got my ashes. And 2 years later, when I came to visit again, he remembered who I was. He said, it's nice to see you again. And I was like, what do you mean again? He said, well, you were here 2 years ago for ashes, weren't you? I said, yeah, but of course, you know, I make everything racial. I said, I'm pretty sure you remember me. I'm the only Black person in this church or whatever, which I always say, just.
I'll tell you the inside story on that later, but right now you made me sound really good, so.
But you know, my thing is that to see the change in this community or in this parish really made me feel good, made me feel welcomed, because he remembered me after 2 years, knew who I was, and that made me feel like I was recognized. Someone, you know, he paid attention. And, you know, I've been coming here now almost 5 years.
Yeah.
And I was shocked and amazed when I was here for a meeting, a DOK meeting, and the 8:30s, the 10:30 service was getting out, and there were more people who looked like me. I was just blown away, because when I first came here, and you can't tell me it wasn't because of the color of my skin, that no one in this church spoke to me. I believe that, and I will believe that.
Yeah, well, I like to think we've come a long way.
We've come
We've
a
got
long
ways to
way,
go, but
a long way.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, this seems like the important stuff. So if it's okay to go to the third question, what strengths and weaknesses do you see in faith traditions? What role does tradition play in your life as a Christian? I mean, I think, did we talk about this last week about people's gendered pronouns and how that's really difficult because of
Okay.
tradition? I mean, that's because of tradition.
We did.
Yeah. I don't want to say it's not an issue, but I think the biggest issue has to do with tradition. I mean, it does. People who are old like me don't know, what do we do instead? Like, we have to restructure our whole language.
Oh, like you, huh?
I'm pretty set in my ways. And it feels real inconvenient. So how much do we bend on tradition, right? And again, that could be the same with like how you dress or how you present, or whether you've got a male or female on your arm, right? Like, what role does tradition play? And, you know, in the Episcopal Church, we say it's 1/3. We do. Scripture, tradition, and reason. They're supposed to like always be talking to each other. And if we're honest, sometimes tradition talks a little louder. Sometimes reason talks a little bit louder. Sometimes scripture talks a little louder, although usually that's through reason and tradition anyway, that we hear it, right? And when's the time to push the conversation out of tradition? I mean, I think that is hard.
So what's wrong with tradition? I mean.
Nothing's
it's-
wrong with
it's-
it until it becomes your God,
Oh, no,
right?
that's different.
Like if you say, I grew up and we don't eat breakfast till we've had the host, till we've had the Eucharist.
That's
Is
how I
there
grew up.
anything wrong in that?
That's how I grew up.
There's nothing wrong with that, is there? Is there anything wrong with eating breakfast before you have that?
No.
No. So as long as you can hold that this is what I do, good for you, no problem. Starts to become a problem when your faith is weak. That's why you had breakfast first. That's a problem, right?
Well, it's judgment, it's somebody's judging
judgment.
you
Uh-huh.
for what you do.
Yeah.
And, that's not right.
Yeah. And so when tradition becomes a judge, that seems unhealthy. And when tradition is a way of even you do you, I'll do me, that's a phrase people say, you do you. And I actually really hate that phrase because there's very little respect to that. When tradition holds me in place from loving you, I don't have to do what you do, but it's helpful if I can see what you're doing is different from me and I can appreciate what it does for you without having to do it myself. I think this is when we get into messes. And I'll tell you, I get into trouble when people inflict traditions on me and I get real defensive. Because sometimes this happens. Well, every church I've gone to does it this way. And my response is, I don't want to go to those churches. So I'm not doing it that way. Which is not nice of me.
In my old church, before I came here.
I'm a cradle Episcopalian.
Yeah.
Good for
I mean,
you. I'm not.
Those are
I am.
the phrases when people start out with, in my old
You're
church.
doing it wrong.
Yeah,
because in my old
because in
church.
my old church, we did it this way, and then you wanna say, well, why are you not there now?
Yeah.
I mean, why
That's
did you come
That's a
here?
good way to get cussed out. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and that bumps us right into the Lord's Supper, right? Because this is where we get to hear about this. And I hope you've noticed, we don't do it like they did. They had a real full meal, not a wafer. And I hope you're noticing the problem is the people who brought the food didn't have to work. So they brought all the fried chicken at 4 o'clock and they ate it. And the people came there after work and they were giving them like the thighs. And there wasn't a lot of thighs to even go around.
Halloween.
So Paul is
Ginger.
saying, you're having an inequitable community meal. Eat your fried chicken at home. If you can't wait till 6 o'clock, go ahead and eat it. But then do something in community where people get to be equal instead of the ones who brought the food or the ones who get first dibs on it. When you bring a gift, it's gone. Don't try to keep the
Yeah.
share for yourself. Now, we don't do that. We do potlucks, right? We do that, but as he mentioned, we don't like put that in the liturgy. Now, I have offered, I've never had a group take me up on this. I've offered to Foyers groups. I know you're going to drink wine. Why not have me consecrated on the Lord's table the Sunday prior to your Foyers dinner? And then you can say, right, we're also having Eucharistic wine.
So why
The
would,
anxiety people would have about washing those glasses.
Apparently they're real anxious.
Yeah.
Apparently they're real anxious.
why?
No one's ever done it, but actually that's how they did it.
But why? I mean, why the angst? Why?
Well, I think we've probably done it in some ways. We see like, oh, it can get out of hand. So the way we do that is we're not having a meal. Everybody gets the same little thing, and that way it's equitable. And there's some truth to that, right? If you minimize it, it's harder to get wrong. But when you minimize things, you also, well, minimize them. So there are traditions. There's one called the Moravian Church, and we're in communion with them, really small. And they have something called Love Feast. And the Love Feast is a Eucharistic meal where you sit down and sure enough, you bless the wine and the bread, and you don't take a sip, like you drink a glass of that blessed wine, and you eat that bread with your dinner, and you're all around the same table.
Isn't that what they call agape, the love feast?
A love feast or an agape meal. Yeah.
Agape meal.
And John Wesley actually found that real interesting because he met the Moravians and thought they were onto something.
So-
But Methodists don't do it.
So I
We
have
don't need
been
wine.
to two. I have been to two, but I read this and I was like, oh my gosh, I have actually been. Once was with a Mormon family. It was a New Year's dinner. And it talked about just like they had, and I'm trying to remember for the life of me, if we actually had wine, which is very non-Mormon. But I've met a lot of Mormons that are kind of non-Mormon, but I think it was a special like bottle of water that was blessed, and we all had the nicest crystal. And the same thing, another time it was, actually there were two. One was a Christmas dinner here, this was here, the other one was in Washington. One was a Christmas dinner here, and one was a baptism. And it was at the same people's house, and the Christmas dinner was kind of a surprise. We had no idea that there was gonna be communion.
Mhm.
And everybody got in it, again, it was in the nice, really nice crystal. And they were smaller glasses, but they were full, and everybody got them, kids and everybody. The kids got a little bit less. And we knew what it was, and there was a Bible reading, likewise, the same with the Mormon people, it was some kind of reading and praying, and just like they're talking about.
That's what a Sabbath dinner's like. If you've ever been to a Sabbath dinner at somebody's home, a Shabbat dinner, it's meant to be festive. You do say prayers at the table. What do you know? You don't like consecrate wine, but you pass it around.
Yeah. Well,
You do bless the bread, right? That's the thing that you do. And you get more than one sip of that wine. Usually the kiddush is probably pretty full. Yeah.
But don't we all bless our food before we eat it?
No, we don't all. Some people do that. Some people do that.
But it's not necessarily formulaic like this.
Yeah, I mean, imagine you sit down to dinner with friends and I say Eucharistic prayer D, and then we eat the food on the table. I mean, that's different. We don't really do that by and large. Well, you need a priest to do it, right? Consider in our tradition, you need a priest to consecrate the stuff, right? So I'd have to be going to a lot of dinners to get everybody. I mean, normally we do the Lord's Supper in the church, and then they do the potluck in the parish hall. I mean, that's just kind of when we've split it out.
But when I was growing up in church, we took communion together, right? I mean, but it was just something it just was passed down the rows. And then there was a prayer before we took it. But it's just, you're just passing a tray that has a ton of little juices. We would never use actual wine, and little crackers, and you would take it and pass it around. And there was even a little side table, like an altar, where you could go take it with your family.
Yeah.
Whenever you wanted. And the idea is that your prayer is good enough to bless that, and you don't need a priest to say it. There's no difference between a priest saying it and you saying it. And I remember saying that for some reason. And somebody from Altar Girl heard me, and they were so offended.
Yeah.
And I guess I just don't, we just grew up where like the mysticism of the moment was the thing that in the intimacy of spiritual, the spiritual experience is the thing that's highly valued. So, thinking about tradition being something that divides you is kind of wild to me, because I think who cares who handled that bread? The point is that you had a common belief and you all enjoyed it together. What actually doesn't matter, but I know that it matters to plenty of people. And in a way, after I said that and I saw that the person was shocked, like they had no idea that other people did it that way, and a lot of people do it that way.
Yeah.
And that they were really offended by the idea. I was like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And then I crushed that down as the foolishness that it was. And then later I saw the reverence with which they were just treating everything, and it was so important to them. And it really just made me hone in on their humanity. Like, immediately that kind of like ego self pops up that wants to protect you from being wounded. And I was like, oh man, okay, geez. And then I saw, once I was able to set that aside, I saw how important it was to them, and kind of was looking at their reverence for tradition as a tool by which to understand them as a person and just cherish their humanity. And it was something that, rather than divide me from that person, was, at least for me, it was able to bring me back towards them. But that is like a whole, I just didn't grow up that way. So just seeing that in people, and the reason I'm calling it was because I'm now in community with all of these people, and I want to be able to cherish everybody in our communal beliefs. But it's just, the idea of tradition and things just so dividing people to the extent that, you would leave your community of people that you really love is like bizarre to me.
Well, I think particularly because not everybody can articulate why the tradition's important,
Yeah,
but historically I can.
Yeah.
I mean, I can, and having grown up in a church where it didn't matter,
Yeah.
right? And at the same time, we didn't call it a sacrament, we called it an ordinance. But if you ate or drank it in an unworthy manner,
oh,
you were eating and drinking judgment on yourself,
100%.
which is like, God, that's a lot of pressure.
Like, it was the worst thing you could commit.
So it's not a
To
sacrament,
authentically
it's
do
not a
that.
sacrament, but it can hurt you.
Yes. 100%.
And so how interesting that sacraments don't hurt you.
Yeah,
So I would say that's actually probably where some of that is coming from, is like, if we do it right, it doesn't hurt you. So some of that tradition, whether they know it or not, is to protect you from harm.
yeah, I just think they think it's, so special, and just so sacred and so holy. And like, that's fair, it's not a criticism, it just was just some of the things that people have really, really definite opinions about, like, no, we would never use those towels for that, and I was like, oh, okay, well. They're like, we would use these towels
Yes.
that are just an inch smaller, and I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. I'm happy to learn the rules, I do
Yeah.
it for a reason, but it did occur to me, and
Yeah.
it did not occur to me, and of course, in this outside tradition, it's like. It's not saying that they're saying that tradition doesn't matter. It matters so much that people feel like, I guess it's just the legacy of, Catholicism throughout the ages, which I hate to say, because I know lovely Catholic people, but of like a priest being in between you and God. And people feel really strongly about that not being there, about that barrier.
Yeah.
What they see as a barrier being, I'm not saying. it's-
Instead of, I mean, and I think it's interesting, because there's probably people who view me as the mediator between the parish and God.
Yeah.
I don't view myself that way. I see the role as like making sure we tell the story with integrity,
Yeah.
because left to our own devices, it's really easy to throw integrity out the window because I don't like it.
Yeah.
Or to think I'm doing it in God's name. And so like, that's where I think a priest can be a good support, but isn't necessarily. So they're all sticky, right? And do we all know those words? Transubstantiation, consubstantiation, and symbolism?
No.
I don't want to give you a whole lecture on those now, but in case you're wondering, the Episcopal Church doesn't use those words. We use the word real presence, which means consubstantiation. But we use word real presence. We say Jesus is really present in the elements. We just don't know how and don't care.
Oh,
It's a mystery.
memorial.
Memorial is ordinance or symbolism. I mean, there's just three. Transubstantiation means abracadabra, now it's body and blood.
Right,
Consubstantiation means it's changed, but we don't know how
when,
or when. Well, actually, we do know when. It's when everybody says amen. And if you don't say amen, it didn't change
oh, okay.
in our tradition, because I can't say a mass by myself. And symbolism means it only means something if you think it means something. But if you don't think it means the right thing, it's gonna hurt you really bad. So
So let me ask this real quick. So the priest can go ahead and administer the wafer or
Mhm.
or the body. And a layperson can use the chalice. How come it's not?
you
there?
haven't been to 10:30. The kids give out the wafers.
Okay,
Do you know why they do? Because it's easier than holding a chalice and they'd rather do it. And my answer is they're the same anyway, so go ahead.
okay,
Why do we do it the other way? Because tradition
tradition.
says priest gives the body, and I can't say why. Aren't they equal?
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Because I'm like,
But
well,
it's-
at 8 o'clock,
Does anybody have a reason for it? No, that's just how we've done it.
Well, I know
Tradition.
for years, like right before the Reformation, they wouldn't give the common people the wine.
Correct. In
So
fact, there
it
are
was
still
like-
Catholic churches today where you only get the host. You
Yeah.
don't get the wine. The wine is for the clergy.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there are people.
Because we're more important than you peons, right? I mean, no, that's the thing. Or
It's the umbrella. We're right here.
because it costs more money, or because it costs more money.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I did hear someone comment negatively on the fact that the kids are handing out the bread, and I just thought, is Jesus's body more sacred than Jesus's blood?
And
I was
so-
thinking, like, why
And
does it
so
matter?
without being combative, my response is, since we say that those are like equal in weight and authority, and because my personal theology as your priest is to utilize children in leadership as much as I
As much as
can,
possible.
then why would I make an impediment to a kid when I can hold the chalice perfectly fine? And people won't like that response and they'll do whatever but just like I do. If you give an answer I don't like, then I'll just say, fine, you told me and I still don't like you, right? I mean, that happens sometimes, but all we can do is say it, right? That's it.
Well, for the record, I do think the way that we do the rite is extremely beautiful and I do appreciate it, or we can go to this church. It's been a fascinating last few years.
Isn't Altar Guild a really, really interesting way to learn?
I love it.
I
think it's
mean,
an awesome way to learn about
listen,
things.
I
Because you can
can't,
just be hands-on and
Yeah.
you can ask little like minutia questions, and then most people will be like, I don't know. You'll be like, why do we do this? And they're like, I don't know why we do that. But then you get to go on a little journey of figuring out why you do that.
The best part
love
of it
Altar
for
Guild.
me is seeing Altar Guild members who do it as an expression of their piety, not as an expression of this is how we've always done it. And we've got lots of those people here. Like it is a prayer for them to fold that linen into thirds. Me, I'd probably roll it up because then I wouldn't have to fold it. And I'm glad we have people who do it because it's beautiful. They put it out and it's beautiful and it's clean and it's inviting. And that's why they're doing it most of the time.
I sit and I look at the all the time.